Catherine, what is this? I told you to prepare a meal for everyone.
Carol glared at me and spoke in an exaggerated tone. Yes, that's why I prepared this meal for everyone, I replied, looking confused, pretending not to understand what she was implying.
Shut up. Were you really planning to serve this disgusting food to everyone? How incredibly rude.
David then grabbed the 20 steaks on the table and threw them into the trash.
Don't serve peasant food to my family.
Prepare something else.
Following David's lead, Carol tossed the steaks into the trash. The gathered relatives fell silent at their outrageous behavior. I didn't prepare anything else. Breaking the silence, I threw in a bold remark.
What?
What?
David and Carol froze at my words. They still had no idea of the turmoil that awaited them. My name is Catherine. I am a 40-year-old office worker. After graduating from college, I joined my current company as an office clerk, where I have worked for nearly 20 years. Although I don't have any significant complaints about my company or job, the thought of continuing to work indefinitely naturally weighs on me. I haven't had many opportunities to meet people, so I've remained single up to this age. Unexpectedly, an invitation from a junior colleague led to a significant change in my future.
Catherine, if you have time this weekend, would you like to join us for a mixer?
I've been mentoring this junior colleague since they joined the company, but I never imagined the day would come when we'd go to a mixer together. My junior colleague regularly organizes these mixers. This time, the age range of the men attending is quite broad, so they invited me. But I'm not used to such gatherings, so I might ruin the atmosphere. Why don't you go with the younger folks? I gave a plausible excuse, but my junior colleague insisted. It's no problem at all, clearly wanting to include me. Thinking it might be a good pace change, I accepted the invitation. I thought I had experienced love just like anyone else, but after turning 30, I lost interest. Without expecting much, I approached the day with the thought of enjoying some good food. The designated place was an expensive Italian restaurant, far too pricey for a young woman to choose. I don't have that much money with me.
It's fine, they reassured me.
The men were already gathered in the private room we were shown to. I spotted one who seemed about my age among the relatively young men. Among the relatively young men, I spotted one who seemed about my age. This was my fateful encounter with David. He was 42, 2 years older than me. Even among the younger men, he didn't look out of place. He was youthful and attractive. David must have thought I was around his age too, because we ended up talking almost exclusively that night. Our conversation was so engaging that I had completely fallen for him by the end of the mixer. Though I didn't want to seem too eager and risk scaring him off, I gave him my contact information before parting ways. When David contacted me the next day, I couldn't help but pump my fist in victory. I savored the joy of being a woman, a feeling I had long forgotten. From there, things progressed smoothly, and David and I started dating. David works as a sales representative at a company run by his relatives. Although he's in sales, he holds a managerial position, often handling negotiations and making decisions at crucial times. After dating for about a year, David proposed to me. I accepted without hesitation and officially became David's fiancee. However, What awaited me was a life of hardship I could never have imagined. After we vowed to marry, we finally met each other's parents. Though we weren't officially married yet, my parents were overjoyed, thanking David repeatedly during the dinner. We decided to arrange a meeting between both sets of parents on another occasion, so I met David's parents, Carol and Kevin, along with David. The place they chose was a high-end restaurant, and unlike my parents' meeting, the atmosphere was tense and formal. Kevin was quiet but seemed kind, and I could tell he was trying to accept me. On the other hand, Carol didn't seem to like me from the moment she saw me.
Oh, I thought you'd be a bit younger.
This was the first thing she said upon meeting her son's fiancee. With that single remark, dark clouds gathered in my heart. Carol continued to ask about my age and whether we planned to have children, making uncomfortable comments throughout the evening. Kevin tried to change the subject several times, but Carol would shut him down, insisting these were essential matters. It seemed clear that Carol was the dominant figure in this family. David never once tried to stop her, always siding with her. At that point, I could have ended my relationship with David, but I didn't want to miss this precious chance that had come my way at this age. I greeted them and left, my heart heavy with unease. Since that day, my unwavering feelings for David have gradually changed. I hadn't noticed before because I was so caught up in my emotions, but I started to realize that David's behavior was very odd. I knew he lived with his parents, but his constant need to consult Carol made me raise my eyebrows. It might be understandable if he were younger and less experienced, but David is over 40. I couldn't help but feel uneasy about his behavior. Sure enough, David came up with an unexpected proposal.
When we get married, you'll move in with me and my parents. We're already engaged, so now is a good time. Move in as soon as possible.
David said this as if it were the most natural thing in the world, leaving me speechless.
Don't just sit there. Tell me when you're moving in. Mom needs to know.
His insistence sent chills down my spine. I had suspected it since meeting his parents, but David was a mama's boy, and Carol had no intention of letting go of her son. The thought of living with them was unbearable. But every time I found faults in David or Carol and wrestled with my feelings, I thought of my parents' joyful faces and the wedding invitations from my friends. I couldn't afford to be selfish anymore. All the anxiety and dissatisfaction swirling in my mind were eventually silenced by one single thought. Okay, I'll call the moving company immediately and let you know. David, satisfied with my response, hung up the phone immediately. It was clear he had no intention of considering how I felt. Living with a partner would be exciting, something you'd eagerly anticipate. But David's eagerness for me to move in seemed more for Carol's sake than ours. Am I going to spend the rest of my life catering to Carol? Still, I hoped that my worries would fade once we started living together. I had no choice but to think positively. I forced the doubts out of my mind and began searching for a moving company. Once the move was complete, our life together began. The life I had secretly hoped for was nowhere to be found. Carol was even colder and harsher to me than she had been before.
David is going to be a CEO someday. Do you think it's okay for his wife to be so incompetent?
She constantly criticized me, even though she did very little herself. Kevin tried to reprimand her, but it didn't have much effect. It was clear that Carol ruled the household. Each day was a living hell, and I felt like Cinderella enduring a miserable existence. Despite everything, I had one slight reprieve. Carol often went out during the day with her idle friends. Even though I still had my chores, it was a relief not to have her hovering and criticizing. As long as I finished all the housework before she returned, I only had to endure her criticism of the results. During the day, when David and Carol were out, Kevin would share insights about the household with me. The company's president where David works is Kevin's brother's son, making him David's cousin. Kevin's brother started the company initially, but after he passed away a few years ago, his son took over. His name is Bob, and unlike David, he is very gentle. Bob and his mother, Mary, regularly visit our house. Mary said Kevin's brother had asked her to look after Kevin, which is why they visit often.
Carol and David are just like that. I worry about Kevin being left alone.
Kevin's brother, unable to stand David's lack of employment, took him into the company, saving both David and Carol. Despite this, David and Carol maintain an arrogant attitude, believing they are doing the company a favor by being there. They even see Bob as an enemy, thinking David should be in charge. However, both David and Carol are inherently timid. They grovel before Bob and Mary, acting like sycophants. They are obsequious to their superiors, but rude and arrogant to those below them. David and Carol are genuinely awful people. Bob and Mary know how David and Carol are, but they cannot openly confront them. It's likely because they feel bound by a sense of obligation to the memory of their deceased father and husband, who was an essential relative to both of them.
You have it tough too.
Mary often consoled me whenever Kevin shared how I was treated in the house. Bob and Mary faced difficulties similar to those faced by David and Carol. Naturally, this led to a sense of solidarity between us.
David has always been overbearing. I was against letting him join the company, but my dad wouldn't listen. Even though he's given the department head title, it's just for show.
Bob muttered this once when Kevin stepped out. He said the company's morale was suffering because of David. Bob wanted to talk to Kevin about it, but his promise to his father held him back. I wasn't the only one whose life had been disrupted by David. Even though this happened before our official marriage, I couldn't break off my engagement with David. Amid all this, the idea of holding an engagement party for the relatives came up.
It's normal to rent a fancy restaurant for such an event, but this is your chance to prove yourself. Organize the party and show the relatives what a great fiancee you are.
When I heard this, I thought it was another childish act of spite. However, it had a deeper meaning than I initially thought. I couldn't refuse and had to accept the proposal. Although it was an engagement party, I needed to figure out where to start. Relying on the internet, I began researching what needed to be done. This wasn't a fun party with friends for a young couple. Seeing the happy party photos online made me feel even more depressed. With advice from Mary, I managed to plan the schedule for the day. Should I really be making the food myself? I knew in my head that it was wrong to rely so much on Mary for advice, but I couldn't help seeking her guidance.
Well, I'm sure they included that in their plan.
Since moving in, I have been cooking, but Carol and David always complained about the taste. Despite this, they expected me to prepare homemade dishes for the party. I couldn't understand what they were thinking. The more I thought about it, the more anxious I became. But the promised engagement party day was rapidly approaching. And then, on the day of the engagement party, Carol had even dictated what I should wear, so I woke up at 4 a.m. to follow her instructions and get dressed up. It was past 9 a.m. when my hair and dress were ready. I rushed back home and began preparing the food. The party was set to start at noon.
Do you really think you can get everything ready starting this late? You need to be more organized. Don't embarrass us.
Carol yelled at me before heading to the salon. Although I had cleaned and set up the house the day before, it was a mess again when I returned. It was clearly David and Carol's doing. At this point, I began to understand the purpose behind this engagement party. If my suspicions were correct, it was an incredibly childish scheme, and I couldn't fathom why they would go to such lengths.
Catherine, you're so beautiful they want to show you off, but it seems like there might be something more behind it.
Mary's words when she learned about the party echoed in my mind. David's words, "She's completely helpless without me," also surfaced, sending chills down my spine. But this event could unexpectedly present an opportunity for me. I reorganized my schedule to ensure everything would be ready on time and waited for Carol and David to return. It was a little past noon. All the invited guests arrived and chatted in the living room where I had prepared the meal.
Everyone, thank you so much for gathering here today for me.
Just then, as if on cue, David arrived a bit late. Behind him was Carol, dressed in a flashy gown with an equally ostentatious hairstyle.
Everyone, I apologize for the cramped space. Please make yourselves at home today.
With an eerie smile on her face, Carol addressed everyone. Then Carol noticed the steaks on the table with a puzzled look.
Catherine, what is this? I told you to prepare a meal for everyone.
She glared at me and spoke in an exaggerated tone. "Yes, that's why I prepared this meal for everyone," I replied, looking confused, pretending not to understand what she was implying.
Shut up. Were you really planning on serving this disgusting food to everyone? How disrespectful can you be?
Seizing the moment, Carol started scolding me. David joined in, hurling insults at me.
Hey, what is this? Who's going to eat this meat you cooked? Mom, help me throw this out.
With that, David grabbed the 20 steaks on the table and tossed them into the trash.
Don't serve peasant food to my family.
Following David's lead, Carol also threw the steaks away and ordered me.
Prepare something else.
The assembled relatives fell silent at their outrageous behavior. I didn't prepare anything else. Breaking the silence, I threw in a bold remark.
What?
What?
David and Carol froze at my words. Their eyes looked at me as if to say I had lost my mind.
Come on, that won't work. You can't just blame someone else for serving such awful food.
Carol, not believing my words, taunted me even more. David, regaining his composure, followed her lead.
I saved you the trouble of cleaning up. Now hurry and prepare something else.
Ignoring their words, I sighed dramatically. Mary, their behavior was unbelievably rude. Apologizing won't be enough, but what should we do? Mary, quietly observing, slowly stood up when I spoke.
Bob, let's go. I have never been so humiliated.
As Mary spoke, Bob also rose from his seat.
David Carroll, I've cared for you out of respect for my father's last wish, but I can't tolerate this anymore. I seriously doubt your decency as human beings.
Faced with their fury, David and Carol were left flustered. Mary made this food for us, and you insulted her and threw it away like that. I'm not yet part of this family, but I am humiliated. Yes, in reality, Mary had come over to help me out of concern. While I cleaned the messy house, Mary took the initiative to cook the steaks.
What have we done? This must be a mistake.
Seeing the frozen expressions, David and Carol finally understood. Their faces turned pale, and a cold sweat began to drip.
It's a joke. Just a little joke.
In a state of panic, David couldn't think straight and started pulling the steaks from the trash and shoveling them into his mouth.
Delicious. These are the best steaks I've ever had. Mom, here, you should try some too.
David handed the mangled steaks to Carol, urging her to eat.
Oh, really? It looked so delicious that I wanted to keep it all to myself. In my desperation, I accidentally threw it in the trash.
Carol, having lost her composure, started babbling nonsense. But she couldn't bring herself to eat the steak handed to her. Stop it. This is disgraceful. Why can't you apologize for your rudeness? I loudly rebuked them and apologized to Mary and Bob. Thank you for taking the time to prepare this meal for us. I am truly sorry. David and Carol could only stare at me in shock, unable to do anything.
Catherine, you have nothing to apologize for, but this must have opened your eyes. Being with these people is worse than being alone for the rest of your life.
Mary gently murmured, trying to console me. Hearing this, Kevin, who had been silent until now, spoke up.
Mary!
He had tears streaming down his face. Witnessing the entire scene left Kevin so shocked that he couldn't speak until now.
I feel so ashamed, not realizing how ungrateful and rude they were.
Kevin's voice trembled as he apologized to Mary and Bob. Seeing this, Bob walked over and comforted Kevin.
Uncle, you and Catherine have nothing to apologize for. Mom and I are to blame for being bound by my father's words. Our kindness ended up turning David and Carol into these monsters.
Bob's words finally made David and Carol react.
No, that's not it, Bob. I just wanted to impress you and Mary. That's why I planned to humiliate Catherine.
David finally admitted to his scheme. As Mary had predicted, they wanted to demonstrate their superiority by insulting me. It's truly pathetic. How shallow can you be? I felt humiliated forever loving David. I was embarrassed that I had endured so much without realizing their true nature.
No. Catherine threatened us. She forced us to do this. Both David and I deeply respect Bob and Mary.
With tears streaming down her face, Carol began to plead after hearing my words. Even at this point, their behavior was truly pathetic. Disgusted by their ugly display, I resorted to my last measure. I didn't want to do this. I took out my phone, navigated to a recording, and played it for everyone.
How long does that incompetent Bob think he can stay president? Why do I have to work under him?
Seriously, he doesn't understand anything. And Mary, who does she think she is? Don't they realize the company exists because of us?
The voices from the phone were unmistakable. Everyone in the room recognized them as David's and Carol's. Their endless complaints and insults echoed throughout the room.
Stop it. This is a lie. Catherine trapped us.
Carol lunged at me, trying to snatch the phone from my hand. Bob stepped in, holding Carol back and calming her.
Carol, please, don't show me this side of you anymore.
Held by Bob, Carol collapsed on the spot. She lay on the floor, sobbing loudly and crying uncontrollably. The guests, witnessing the hellish scene before them, could only look down silently. Even I hadn't anticipated it would turn into such a chaotic scene.
David, this is truly disappointing.
Bob released Carol and stood up. The events that followed were predictable to everyone. David would likely lose his job. However, David himself would never be able to accept such a thing.
Are you kidding me? What's so disappointing? I feel bothered when you act so high and mighty. Who do you think made this company what it is?
David, with bloodshot eyes and spitting as he spoke, stepped forward toward Bob. He looked like he was about to grab Bob by the collar, and who knew what he might do next.
Wake up.
Sensing the tension, Bob slapped David hard across the face in the next instant. David stumbled backward from the unexpected slap and crouched down. A few people tried to intervene to prevent further escalation, but David had clearly lost his will to fight. Then, Kevin stood up, looking at the collapsed David and Carol. His eyes no longer held tears, but were filled with a stern glare directed at the two of them.
You foolish son, do you really need to understand who has supported you all this time? And you too.
Kevin turned his gaze from David to Carol.
You show no gratitude to Bob and Mary, who honored my brother's wishes. You've trampled on my late brother's feelings and their kindness. Get out of this house right now. I've had enough of seeing your faces.
Kevin, struggling to contain his anger, condemned them both. His intensity made even me and the guests tremble.
No way. Dad, what are you saying? I'm your son, not Bob.
Unable to accept Kevin's words, David clung to him. Carol, mimicking David, also pleaded desperately.
Dear, are you seriously telling me to leave after all these years together? And David is your son.
Hearing their words, Kevin calmly responded,
After being so rude and humiliating my relatives, what makes you think you are my son or family? If you understand, leave now. I never want to see your faces again.
There was no hesitation in Kevin's words, and it was clear he had no intention of forgiving David and Carol. Both of them collapsed in tears again. Then David turned to me, sobbing.
Catherine, please help me. It was all out of love. I love you, so please forgive me. Say something, please.
David pleaded with me, his face a mess of tears and snot. Don't touch me. You're disgusting. I instinctively pushed his hand away and stepped back. Realizing this was my honest reaction, David froze. He looked at me in disbelief and then glanced around the room. David finally understood the stares everyone was directing at him. All the guests were looking at him with disdain. David, who thought he was the hero of this household and company, finally realized the truth. He understood how much he disliked and what people thought of him. Please don't involve me any further. I never want to see you again. I can only imagine what my eyes looked like when I said that. I moved away from David and crouched beside the collapsed Carol. Then I whispered softly in her ear, "Thank you for everything. It seems you didn't like me, but I've hated you since I saw you. You think you can do anything but couldn't match me in anything. No matter how hard you try, you'll never catch up to me. Truly, you are a sad person." With my brightest smile, I loudly expressed my thanks for everyone to hear. Upon hearing this, Carol let out an inarticulate scream and collapsed again. The engagement party ended shortly after that. Of course, the hellish atmosphere never lightened, and everyone left feeling awkward. After everyone had gone, Kevin, Carol, David, Mary, and Bob remained in the house. Having thoroughly thanked Carol and David, I had no intention of saying more. I silently watched to see what would happen next.
Bob and Mary, I sincerely apologize. This is all my fault for not supervising properly. I'm ashamed to have embarrassed you in front of everyone.
Kevin repeatedly apologized to Bob and Mary. Bob and Mary tried to stop him and reassure him.
Ultimately, it's my responsibility to rely on my father's words. I should have faced David head on with my own resolve.
Bob did not blame Kevin and firmly maintained that it was his responsibility. It's astonishing how different cousins can be.
Exactly, Kevin. You shouldn't blame yourself.
Mary joined in, trying to comfort Kevin.
You must realize by now, David, that we can no longer work together. If you believe in yourself, try doing everything on your own.
Bob calmly informed David of his dismissal. David and Carol remained silent, their heads hung low, listening to Bob's words.
I have already informed all employees of your dismissal. As a result, numerous complaints about your harassment surfaced. The company cannot overlook this and plans to sue you.
Given his behavior at home, it was no surprise that David had acted the same way at work. Later, I learned that David had used his position to suppress complaints against him. Now that the truth was out, it was only natural for him to face the consequences. Thanks to Bob hiring a skilled lawyer, David ended up paying significant damages. David and Carol lost more than just money. As Kevin declared, they even lost their home. Despite the help offered by Mary and Bob, Kevin remained firm in his decision. No matter how much David and Carol cried and pleaded, Kevin wouldn't budge. Without Kevin and David, Carol had no means of support, and now David had just lost his job. If they were thrown out, they wouldn't have a way to support themselves even the next day. But with Kevin committed, they had no choice.
Kevin, when will you forgive us?
Carol made a final attempt, but Kevin silently handed her the divorce papers, and she gave up trying to persuade him. They looked at me just before leaving, trying to plead, but I averted my gaze and ignored them. We were now complete strangers with no ties to each other. I've heard that David had a mental breakdown and has been hospitalized ever since. He has no hope of returning to everyday life and has lost everything. In her old age, Carol was working multiple temporary jobs to care for David. Naturally, neither Bob nor Mary nor Kevin had any intention of helping them. Sometime after breaking off my engagement with David and leaving their house, Mary called me. She invited me to work at their company. Returning to my old company wasn't an option, and finding a new job took a lot of work. Gratefully, I accepted Mary's offer and joined Bob's company. The atmosphere at the company had improved significantly after David left, making it a pleasant place to work. I could also use my previous work experience, and the other employees welcomed me warmly. As I worked with Bob, I realized I grew fond of him. It seemed he felt the same way, and we eventually got married. It was a future I had never imagined, but now I am thrilled. I am also profoundly grateful to Bob for loving me unconditionally, even when I was engaged to David. The unexpected future that awaited me after enduring those painful and challenging days feels like it was all part of the process that led me here. Thinking this way, the wounds in my heart slowly began to heal. I vowed to continue my journey with Bob, never forgetting to be humble and grateful.